if you have something to say, unmute yourself just for that time, and then yourself again when you're not talking. Maybe that's a good way to do things. So I wanted to ask, who all has clay with them? Or does anyone not have clay? Seeing lots of clay, okay.
They all have kits, yeah.
All have kits, wow, that's great. That's good. Okay, so, and who has made a sculpture before? Well, the hand raising is working. Raise your hand if you've made a sculpture before.
I just like before I got the kit like today, I just made 2 little characters with my other clay that I had.
That's great. I like to hear that. So today we're just going to focus on relief sculpture. So what's the difference between relief sculpture and other sculpture? Does anyone know? Laura says it's flat. Yeah. Don't be shy to chime in if you want. I'm curious to know what your experience is. But yeah, relief carvings are just flatter carvings. So I have an example here that I can show you. Okay. So here we go. So I just made this in preparation for today's class, and I'm gonna then show you guys a PowerPoint, and we're gonna run through how this was made.
Perfect.
And you don't have to make a fish. Okay, but so that's good. So how about I start with the little presentation. I'm just gonna introduce you to the art form and the tools and materials. You see a little bit of the tools here, as I'm showing these slides, this would be a good time for you guys to just start to work some water into your clay. So if you look at this, as I'm squishing the clay, if I squish it like that, you can see it breaks up. That's because it needs more water. So just as you're watching, you can just put water in there and just get your clay nice and moist. And once you feel that it's wet enough, you just put it back into the plastic bag, and that will keep it wet. Okay. Carly, do you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so here's the presentation. Relief sculpture. So these first couple pictures are things that I've done, and I'll talk a little bit more about what kind of relief sculpture this is in a little bit. These ones are in stone. So the 3 types of relief sculpture are basically high relief, low relief, and sunken in relief. So first we talk about high relief. So high relief is just sculptures that stand out a lot from the background, to the point where some parts are even not connected to the background. So you can see in this picture, the hands and the heads are not even touching the background, but their bodies are halfway sunken into the background. So that's high relief. Here's another example of that. You see it in classical Renaissance architectural art a lot. Here's a high relief that's more typical. The defining feature of a high relief is that it's at least halfway sticking out. So you can see his nose is sticking out, more than half of his head is sticking out, and that's the basics. This is what it looks like from the side. So it's almost like just a normal sculpture, three-dimensional sculpture, but with a background attached. Low relief, what's that going to be? Just lower than the high relief. So as you can see, it's not a full head attached to a background. Everything is sort of compressed like a pancake or something. And so the carving doesn't go as deep into the background. A common form of really low relief is what you see on our coins. And what's interesting, I find, about relief is that even with very, very shallow details, you can still show something that looks like it has volume. And as we'll experiment with our clay, you'll see that how the forms that you create with modeling the clay can define the light and dark, which are basically the shadows and the highlights in the image. Most relief carving, I would say, starts with a drawing. And here's just a quick example that I pulled off of the internet that shows how a low relief is built up in clay. So you might, if you were doing a head, might start with a drawing like this. And the first step after that would be to dab in clay around the perimeter all along the edge of your drawing. And you might wonder, well, why don't you start in the middle and work your way out? This is just because you have to leave yourself enough room for the edges, because in the low relief sculpture, the edges are very important because they're going to be what separates your sculpture from the background. So think of a pyramid. You would start from the outside in if you were stacking up a pyramid, and that's kind of a good way to think about relief sculpture. The middle is the highest point, and the edges and the perimeter are the lowest point most of the time. So after you do the perimeter, you just fill in the middle, and then you add your details. So the last form of relief is sunken in relief. And this is basically something where you have a flat piece of material, whether it be stone or wood or whatever, and you're only carving into it. So you're not taking clay and adding it on to build up, but you're actually digging in and carving away. So instead of working additively, you're working reductively. And as you can see, sunken in relief could be very deep, similar to the high relief, but the difference is that nothing in the sculpture is higher than the background. It's all below the level of the background. And again, it can be very simple. It can just be lines carved into something. So here's an example of a process where I carved a sunken in relief. So I took a flat stone and I drew my picture onto it. In this case, it's going to be a woodpecker. And I draw the outside line, the perimeter. And the first thing I do is I start to dig in that part. Remember with the built up low relief, you started on the perimeter to add material. It's similar in sunk relief, but different in that you dig in the perimeter instead of building it up. So after you dig in the perimeter to a level of depth, then the form starts to come out and you can transfer your drawing onto it. You can slightly see there's lines and references here that show where my details are going to be. And then you continue to work from the outside in carving in your details. I know I said there's only 3 types of relief, but I kind of wanted to show you other possibilities just very quickly. So you could also construct reliefs out of different things. This is Picasso using wood to create an abstracted animal, a bull. And characters can be fun too. You can use paper on the wall. Even bricks in a building could be a form of sculpture. So as you can see, there's a lot more to it than just those 3. I wasn't sure if everyone was going to have the kits with them to follow along with me at the end of this, but this could be good just for if you want to do something after the demo at home. Here are some alternative mediums that are readily available, and you could make sculpture out of this too. So a potato, everyone has a potato in their pantry or their fridge. I'm sure you can carve into it, and you can even paint with it and maybe make a stamp out of it. Tofu, why not try carving that? Sweet potatoes, veggies. The beauty is that if you mess it up, you can just eat it afterwards. Sticky tack, so we have mediums in our home that could be sculptural mediums. Tape, we often think of tape as being something that has no depth, but if you layer it enough, eventually you'll get form. So you could treat this as a plastic medium where you just add little bits of tape to something and build up a sculpture. And here's an example of that. In this case, they've folded the tape and put it together into a kind of picture. Cardboard, I mean, you can cut and glue and make a picture out of that. And once you have these basic skills about how to construct a flat sculpture, you'll be able to communicate depth and perspective, and you can start to do a lot with it, even though it's just a flat material. And I find it good because a lot of the materials that we get at the store, they come flat already. Reliefs are good because you can hang them on the wall. They could be murals. Here's just some examples of what you could do with cardboard. This is actually drywall putty, and a beautiful relief sculpture that someone made with a material you find at the hardware store. Cement. And there's also casting. So if you have some clay and you press something into it, in this case, I pressed some clothing and a tool into wet clay, and then I removed them and poured liquid plaster into that. And after it set, this is what I was left with. So that could be something to try as well. So what else do you have around the home to be a useful sculpture tool? Say you didn't have a kit, or you lose the kit, or you just want to do this with more people. Paper clips can be used as clay working tools. These sewing pins could be used to draw your designs out on the clay, as well as the round end can be used as a modeling tool. Knife and paintbrush are pretty self-explanatory. So if you have the kit, you have one of these tools, and this tool was handmade by me, and I'm just going to show you how you could make it yourself. Because my hope is that afterwards you're excited enough to keep going with this, and it's not impossible to make your own tools. Many people think you got to buy a whole set of tools, but the good thing about making your own tools is that you can make it exactly how you want it, to what shape you want. If it breaks, you could make another one, and also you save a little bit of money, and it's quite a rewarding process to make something yourself. You know, like you take raw materials and you turn it into something that you can make a sculpture with. So that's pretty cool, I think. So what we have here is just a tube with wire stuck into it, and the ends are crimped. These would be the tools that you need to make this tool. It's not very much. So some pliers and a screwdriver, some wire. And for the casings, I just took some of these really cheap paintbrushes from the hardware store and I cut the ends off. So I guess you need that tool too, but you could use the pliers for that. So after you have that, you're left with a hollow tube. And so how do we stick the wire into that and make it hold? Well, I got a length of wire and I folded it in half so that one end was a loop and one end looked like this. I wrapped one end around the pliers to hold it securely. Carly, if you're following along, you'll have to go at light speed here. But again, after I show you this, I mean, you could ask questions, and if you want to do this in the future, this will be recorded so you can go back and watch it again. So I basically just stuck the screwdriver in the looped end, and I held the other end with my foot, and I twisted it around until I had a really sort of braided wire. And I did this because, for one, it makes the wire stronger, and two, because the ridges that are created by the twisting of the wire help with the modeling of the clay. So I cut a piece of it, and this is what you'll need. One of them was longer than the other because it was going to be a different shape. So I just bent it into a circle at the end using the screwdriver as a guide. And then stuck it into the end and pinched the end with some pliers. And there you have it. So once you know how to do this, you can make any kind of shape that you want on the end. And here is quickly just some other tools that I made with copper, but I won't go over that process just today. All right. So, any questions? Now we're going to do the clay portion. So I gotta stop sharing my screen here. Okay. So, does anyone have any idea what they want to make? I should have said, think of an idea for a sculpture, but feel free to unmute yourself and give some suggestions. I'm probably gonna show you how to do the fish again. So no one has any questions or anything to say. That's all right. So here's my workstation. So set yourself up with a board or a piece of cardboard or something, or if you're feeling up to it, just go right on the table and don't tell your landlord or your parents. As long as you clean it up afterwards, I guess that's fine. So the first step, when I was describing the different types of relief, you may remember I was talking about the background. In high relief, it was kind of like a three-dimensional sculpture stuck onto the background, and in low relief, it was a shallow relief built up from the background. And even in the sunken in relief, we were digging into the background. So we need a background, don't we? So that's going to be our first step. So hopefully your clay is really nice and pliable now and wet. And so you want to get a bunch of it. And what you can do is you just start squishing it down in any old way to the background. And you want to give yourself a canvas to work on, an area that's bigger than your sculpture and smaller than your table. So just don't worry about it, just put little dabs down everywhere and you start making your background. So for me, I'm thinking of what I want to do right now. I want to do a fish, and I know that they are long and skinny, so I'm going to kind of make my background that shape. So how's everyone doing with the background so far? Thumbs up. Carly's not sure.
I don't want to unmute and get clay on my computer.
Right. Yeah, now that your hands are all dirty, maybe it's hard to press the computer buttons because you don't want to get your computer dirty. But we'll just go with sign language then.
My computer's clean, so I can just speak for everyone, Carson. How's that?
I already have a bunch of clay on when I press unmute and unmute.
I love it, Anna. Is that you? Let me see. That's great.
Cool. So I got something that's close to the size I want. I'm just going to make this again. Maybe I'll put a little bit more around the edges. And when everyone has something like this, give a thumbs up. If you don't have something like this, give this sign. Okay, so some people need a little bit more time. That's all right. If you decide that you're changing your mind halfway through, you can always add more to the background. This isn't it, you know, you can add it later. But you want to start out with something that's close at least. So we're just trying to get it close. So I have some leftover clay and I don't want to leave that out because it's going to dry and I might need it later. So I'm going to put it back in plastic to keep it moist. So the next tool that we're going to need is something flat. It can be anything flat. This is a popsicle stick. So I took a popsicle stick and I shaped the ends and I made it into 3 different tools. How is it 3 different tools? Well, this edge I'm going to use to flatten the background. Okay, so I'm going to use that by dragging it along in this direction and going back. This side is going to be used for cutting, like a knife. I can use it to cut, and I can use it to model small details. And then this side I can use to model round details. Okay, so how's everyone's background looking? Are you at the same stage as me?
Yep.
Okay, close enough. So take this tool, this stick, and just start to scrape away at the background. Okay. So you should be picking up clay on your tool like that. And as you're doing that, you can just take it off your tool and form it into a ball. And just drag. And you can see I'm dragging away the high spots, and I just want to keep going until it's all flat. If you have a really deep hole from your fingerprints, you can just take some of that extra clay and fill those holes, and then continue with scraping away. And it helps to do it in all sorts of different directions. So do a couple passes this way, and then some on an angle, and then some the other way. And that'll just help to make it flat, and you will get less ridges. So now it's looking really flat. Is everyone getting something that looks like this? Looks good there. So now we have to find out what we want to sculpt. So hopefully you all have an idea. If you don't have an idea, you can do what I'm doing and modify it a little bit to suit your interests. The fish that I chose is a salmon. And it's actually an Atlantic salmon, so it's from the Maritimes. So I have lots of extra clay here. Before I start drawing my sculpture on there, I'd like to have square edges. You don't have to have square edges. You can leave them wavy like this, but I'm just going to cut mine a little bit flat. So I use that side of the tool. Use that side of the tool to cut. Okay, so here's a drawing that I'm going off of. So I mentioned that most relief sculptures start from a drawing, and you don't have to start from a drawing, but I'm going to. And so if you are starting from a drawing, here's how you transfer it. If you're not starting from a drawing, you can just draw it straight on, okay? So maybe I should ask, is everyone at a stage where they're almost ready to draw? Okay. So this is the skewer. You can use anything, a sewing needle, a pencil, anything. You can use your stick if you want to, but I'm going to use this just because it has a point. So if I was drawing straight on, I would just put in my lines like that. And it's nice to draw on clay because, you know, if you make a mistake, you can just wipe it with your stick again. So I can do anything and then just erase it over and over again until I'm happy. If you have a drawing, you can just put it right on top of your clay and then just trace the lines. And you want to make sure that you don't press so hard that you cut through the paper, but you just want to make a slight indentation. So I'm just going to ask, if you're doing something that's not a fish, give me a thumbs up. Okay, cool. I like that. It's creativity. Okay. So for those of you not doing what I'm doing, you're going to want to watch what I do with my hands and how I do it and transfer that to your image. So the drawing or the tracing is the same whether you're doing a fish or a bird, or if you're just doing an abstract shape or anything. You could even be doing a landscape. You could be doing something with flowers and trees. You could do a flower. So I'm just going in and I traced all the way out on the outside of my picture. And then I put some of the reference lines in, but I didn't put a lot of them in because it's not important at this step to get every detail. We're just going to try to get the basic shape. So I reveal my image. So just make the lines a little bit deeper so that you can really see it. So here's this fin. And in the presentation, I was really emphasizing the perimeter. Well, those are the only lines that you really want to worry about off the bat. Perimeter. If you were doing a flower or something like that, the perimeter would be the stem and the petals. And if it was a tree, you'd have to draw every branch. Basically, you'd want to think about what does this look like if it was in a silhouette, if it was just an outline. And you want to trace all the way around your object. So my fish's mouth is open, so that's part of it. So here we go. The next step. Are you ready for the next step? How are you girls doing on the deck there? Thumbs up. Melanie, do you have a question or do you just need more time?
I'm kind of going really slow.
That's okay. We'll give you some time. So the kind of clay that we're using, there's a few different types of clay. This one's water-based. So this is the kind that's made from mud from the river and water, and that's it. So it's an amazing material. And the magic of it is that when you put it into a kiln, it turns into something really, really hard, something that is really hard to break down. So, but this one in particular, it's a low fire clay, so it doesn't need a very high temperature. You could put it in the fire pit outside and that would be pretty much hot enough. Different types of clay would be oil-based clay too, which is, it's something that it never dries out, but it gets harder or softer based on the temperature that it's in. So if it's a really hot day, it'd be easier to work with. And then there's polymer clay that's made out of synthetic material. And that is a kind of clay that will set as well, but it's not water-based.
I have a question. Can we like paint it afterwards?
Yep, yeah, you can, yeah. Yeah, you can use watercolors to paint it. You can use acrylics, anything like that. If you were going to put it in a kiln, you could put glazes on it too. And those come in all colors. So, how's everyone's drawings looking? ready to start deepening them or giving them form? Okay. So we want to separate our picture from the background. And if we were doing sunk relief, we would carve our picture in. But I want the fish to be above the surface. So it's going to be somewhere between high relief and low relief. So that means that I got to take some of the background away or add material, but I'm going to do a little bit of both. So this is the fun part. So take your tool like this, or whatever tool came in your kit. Carly, do you have a tool?
Yeah. Made one.
Cool. So Carly just made her own tool. She followed my instructions and she was able to make one in 10 minutes. Impressive. Okay. So you're just gonna carve everything out that's not your picture, okay? And what you wanna do is try to take this same amount of material off all the way around, okay? You want to lower that background so it becomes lower than your picture. So just carefully, just start digging pieces out and you'll get the hang of this, how deep you can go with the tool. It's probably better to take little pieces off at first until you get comfortable with it. But just work your way around, and every time you take some, just put it into a ball. Okay, and keep that ball nearby. So I'm gonna work around, and I'm just gonna scoop out material. You could use basically anything for this. You could use a spoon, you could use a knife, but this tool works really well because it just peels the clay right away. So I'm going right up to my line. And I'm just taking little pieces off at a time. And it's up to you how deep you go. You can go as deep as you want. You just want to make sure that you have enough thickness on your wall. Because if I go too deep, then the background will start to get a little bit thin. See? Okay. So if it's too thin, then it won't be very strong. So I got to leave enough on the background to still be strong and act as a support. But you can basically leave the thickness of your finger. So, that's my finger for reference. So that's a good thing. And it doesn't matter how big your finger is because it's close enough. All right. So I'm getting pretty close to having a sculpture now. It's now a relief carving. It's now a relief sculpture because it's not all on one level. Before it was just a drawing and now it's a sculpture. So there you go. But because we're all artists here, we want to do a little bit more than that, right? So we want to give it details. and we want to round things out to maybe give it some shapes. Maybe at the end, we'll give it some textures. So that's what we'll do. How's everyone doing with removing the background? Does that mean your background is fully lowered? No, okay. So almost there.
Oh, that's me. I'm in the other room.
I'll mute myself and just yell. Do you have recommendations for like getting detail? Like really, like the mouth?
Yeah,
Take that out?
that's a good point. So Carly just asked a question, and you probably didn't hear it because she's on mute, but she was saying, what if your tool is too big to get something out like the mouth? Well, this is what I would do for the mouth. So I can use my knife, and I can just basically squish it in. And I can just dig it out. And working general to specific, we'll go in afterwards with a smaller tool, and we'll give it more the shape we want. So we can use the little stick to push in the mouth. It's all malleable, the clay, so we can squish it around, and if we make a mistake, we can always fix it. Okay. So if you're happy with that, you can move on to the next step. But something you could do is take the stick like this, and you could define the sculpture a little bit more by like giving it a corner. Your clay working tool has a hoop, so it will leave a smoothly blended curve into the background. But if I take my stick and dig the background out like this, then I'm gonna get a clearer picture. It'll just be a little bit more defined. Okay, so depends what you're working on. You don't need to do this, right? It might look nice to be blended in, but for mine, I just want it to be a little bit sharper on the edges, a little bit more crisp. So what I'm doing, I'm just pushing in a little bit, and then I'm just pushing that clay away from the sculpture and scooping it up. So I can do this all the way around. It's kind of like a flicking motion. I'd like to know what you guys are carving over there, or what you're modeling, I guess. Does anyone want to share with us? Oh, Wendy's doing a fish. Looks great, Wendy.
Monica is making a picture of her little brother.
That's great.
I guess we could share.
I'm making an elephant.
An elephant. That's great. I'm not sure who said that, but really cool.
That's Kristen, the summer student's roommate, Robin.
Okay. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys made at the end. So something to note is that the way I'm showing you isn't the only way to do this kind of work. Can anyone think of a different way to maybe to get a sculpture that looks like this. Think of making cookies at Christmas time. Sorry, my camera just went out. I'm going to try to bring my other camera back. It'll just take a minute, but you can see me for now. So what I wanted to say is that if you had another slab of clay, you could cut shapes out of it with a stick or whatever. And you could add those to a flat piece of clay. And that would be another way to build your form up. We just dug away the background just because, you know, it's one option, but I just want to show you that there's different ways to do things. So you can cut things out and add them as well. And because it's clay, you can just put it right back. Okay. Is everyone ready for moving on to details? I had a few yeses. So now I want to give my fish some volume. So I'm just going to take some of the clay that was left over from digging out the background, and I'm going to add that. And I have to add that somewhere where I know that the fish has some width. So I know that the fish is wide in the middle and it gets narrower at the ends. So I'm going to make something like a coil just by rolling the clay in my hands. And I'm going to decide how long I want it. I'm just going to stick it right on. Okay, so now my fish, my salmon, is starting to have a belly. So I just want to blend that in, and if you get your finger a little bit wet, that'll just help you smooth things. But don't get the clay too wet, or else it'll turn into mud again. So you can use your fingers to squish it down, and then I'll use my stick, and I'm just going to kind of push everything else down to that edge that I have defined before. So I just push the clay down like I'm putting butter onto bread. And I just spread the clay out. And I can smooth it like this. And so you can see that I'm scraping as well as pushing. So these are two different things. So if I hold my tool pretty much straight up and down and I drag it, it's going to peel clay off of my sculpture, and that's going to reduce the volume. But if I just push it down, it's just going to move the clay to a different spot. So you can use a mixture of techniques to get at what you want. And if you feel that there's too much clay, then use the scraping to scrape some of it off. And if there's places where you want to add, you just put that clay right back on, and then use the scraping method to blend it back in. Okay. So I know fishes are very streamlined, so everything blends together. They're very smooth things. So I'm going to blend the body right into the tail there. And I'm just going to push the tail in a little bit to give it some shape like that. And then again, I always think that I want the sculpture defined from the background. That just helps us see it, right? The perimeter is very important to us when recognizing things. That's why it's so easy to recognize what a shadow is. You know, if you see your shadow or something, you can almost tell who it is without having to see anything that's in the middle. That's just the outline of somebody. So as people, we're very good at recognizing shapes and outlines of things. So when we make sculpture, we want to remember that and make sure that the outline is very accurate to what we're trying to sculpt. Okay. So now he's starting to have some depth. Okay. So if I turn him, you start to see he's sticking out. He's sticking out from the background like that. Okay. So the middle is the widest part, and then he gets narrower at the ends, narrower at the ends. And then his fins are somewhere in the middle. So one way to think about it is different levels. So the background's one level. Maybe in my case, the fins are one level. They would be the middle ground. And then the belly here is the foreground. So the foreground is the thing that's closest to us, and the background is the thing that's farthest away, and then the fins are somewhere in the middle ground. Okay, so now that our sculpture has some shape to it and some volume, we're starting to see something that was different than when we just had a drawing. So if you are familiar with drawing, you know that in order to make shadows on a drawing, you have to shade things. You have to color in with your pencil or shade something with charcoal. And you have to do that in certain areas to make it look like the thing that you're drawing has shape. With sculpture and relief sculpture, we're modeling the clay so that real shadows happen, okay? And we're doing that in a way that's flattened, okay? So if something is angled, how am I going to show this? So the top of the fish, it's angled a little bit up, so that becomes a highlight. And then the belly is tucked underneath, that becomes a shadow. So if you're looking at a drawing and you see a shadow, I don't really have too many shadows on here, but see under the chin is darker, right? So when I transfer my drawing to a sculpture, I know the dark parts have to be underneath, so they have to be tucked in. And when they're tucked in real life, that'll make a real shadow, and that will give my picture the shading. So how's your fish coming, Wendy? Well, you look happy.
I have Oren entertaining me here.
How are you liking it, Oren?
Oren, talk.
It's fine. It's good.
Yeah.
He's doing all kinds of interesting things and explosions, and I can't begin to explain.
Yeah. So I'm at a point here with my fish where I have shape but no details, okay? So I have the outline. We did that by lowering the background, remember? So I drew my picture on, and my sculpture was completely two-dimensional at that point. It was just a drawing on clay. And then I scooped out the background, and that gave part of it a different level. So the fish became one level and the background was the other level. And then I gave it some form. So now it has more of a background, a middle ground, and a foreground. So that's something to keep in mind, is that when we're creating sculpture, most of the time, we're trying to recreate real life. You know, I'm making a fish, and that's something that's real. If I'm doing abstract sculpture, it wouldn't be recreating real life, but I would be inspired by it, right? So it serves to say that if you're doing abstract sculpture, you also want to think about background, middle ground, and foreground. Why? Because it adds interest in it, and it shows us something familiar, and it might hold our attention longer. So when we're walking around in real life, there's things that are close to us, and there's things that are really far away, and then there's things that are in the middle. So when we're doing sculpture, if we can capture some of that, then we can be pretty sure that we're going to have something that is interesting to look at because it has variation. Okay. And again, we're trying to be illusionists in a way. Like we're trying to depict more space than is really there. Like a fish is thicker than this, right? If it was a real fish, it would really stand out. And I'm not showing the back of it, but by doing this, I'm giving you the illusion of a fish, and it looks just like a fish, even though it's flat. So that's the idea. So now, going into details. So at this point, if I was making a sculpture, I would put the drawing back onto the sculpture a little bit, just so that I can scratch in where my details are. So I might want to put my eyeball exactly where I drew it. So I just can poke that in, and the gills on the fish. Again, if you don't have a drawing, you can just draw these in wherever you like. You can always change it later. Okay. So there's not a lot of details on the fish, but the details that are there are important because it will really make it look like a fish. So the one thing is fish have sort of lips. So you can make a little coil, a really small one, and we can kind of put that around the mouth. Okay. And again, if you put too much, you can always take some away afterwards. Don't worry if it's not looking like how you want it right away, because it's all a process. You can change it as you go. So I'm taking my sharpened stick there and giving it some lips. And then I might look at my drawing and I go, okay, so now I want to make some gills, okay? But I have this jawbone piece here, okay? And that looks like it would be higher than other things. So I'm going to add that instead of carve it away. Okay. And I can just blend that in. I can can just blend it in with my finger. Take the round part of my tool. Okay. So, and I closed his mouth a little bit, but I can just push that open a little bit. One thing about the salmon is, well, they have a hooked jaw anyways, so I can push that jaw up a little bit. They only have a hooked jaw when they're spawning. I'm not sure why, I'm not a marine biologist, but when they start to swim up the rivers, they leave the ocean and they go back up the rivers to spawn. Their jaw gets a little bit longer on the bottom and it gets this hook to it. So let's see, I'll show a little closer. Can't get very close. Okay. So how's everyone's sculptures coming? Are you done? If you're done, give a really big thumbs up. Okay, that's good. I didn't want anyone to be done yet. Okay. So I put the eyeball in, and you know, people have eyelids and eyebrows and stuff like that. I don't know if fish do, but I'm gonna put, I know I have to put something around the eye. In my drawing, this is what I have. Okay, so I sort of have an eye socket. Okay, so you can see like around the eye I have shading, so that means that it's going to be lower. If there's a shadow, that means I have to tuck it in, tuck it under. So I'm going to draw my eye in, and then I'm going to dig in those places around it to create an eye socket. Okay, and this might be too small to see, but that's okay.
Sue, take a look at your son. He's got clay on his chin and mud, and he's doing the whole body thing.
That's great. Of course he is.
Good for your skin.
I'm carving out grant concepts at the moment. Very different kind of therapeutic. Oh, it's looking great, Carson.
Good. So I sort of stuck the eyeball on, and then I gave it an eye socket around. And you can see where I added clay before. I blended it in, right? And then it creates a shadow underneath there. Now my next thing that I'm going to add is this little fin on the side. So I have a little line drawn in here, but I'm going to add the fin on top of that. Okay. So I'm just going to get the rough shape in, and then I'm just going to basically use my knife to carve away. And it doesn't have to be super accurate.
Did you see that question, Carson, in the chat? Monica wants to know if a fish is your favorite animal.
No.
Nope.
We had to bail. Oren needed to get washed,
Okay.
and I might have to rescue my apartment.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks,
I'll-
Nandy.
I'll show you my fish, Carson.
Cool. I do like fish. I mean,
Oh, nice.
oh, that's really cool. Is that a flounder? It's
It
like,
is what it is.
it's tiny. It's like this big on my screen, so it looks good though. I like it.
Well, I had to share the clay with Oren, right? So mine's half size.
Yeah, that's good. Cool. I think salmon would be my favorite fish if fish was my favorite animal, if that makes sense.
I like all those ips. I like that.
A fish is, I think I chose it because it's an easy one to start with. You know, without looking at a reference, you know, most people can draw a fish. And there's some interesting details too. So now I got my fin there. I can use my skewer to basically give some pleats in the fin. So I just press in that. And I'm basically drawing at this point, but I'm indenting around the edges. I might push in that. And where the fin connects, I'm just going to blend that right in. And I can do that to the other fins too. If anyone is a marine expert, they could tell me what fin is missing. There's one fin that's missing on this fish. It actually has one back here too. So yeah, like I was saying before, if you forget something, you know, don't worry, you can always add it. So I drew it in there so I know exactly where I want it to be. And then maybe I'll model my little piece of clay first a little bit to get it to a kind of close shape. And then I'll stick it right on.
Nice. We have a little report. Alexa and Sylvie, their computer died, so they just wanted to say that they really enjoyed it.
Cool. Yeah, my phone died, and so that's why you don't see me. I hope that's okay.
Yeah.
So there's that fin. And the fun thing about it too is you don't have to be exactly accurate. You know, like I'm just pressing my stick in here because that's what I have, and that gives me the impression of what a fin looks like, or what at least what we expect a fin to look like. It also does something else. It leaves a mark from the tool that we used. I'm almost done. Sorry about the bright light that's coming in here. There's no curtain there, so I'll try to block it a little bit. But let's keep getting the details in where you want them. And I know there's some gills back here. Let's do that. Gills are similar to, they're similar to the shape of the fins, but I'm gonna do them by building up the layers instead. So I'm gonna kind of do it like shingles on a house. So I'm gonna take little coils and I'm gonna squish them on. Squish them in like that. I'm not gonna blend them all the way in. I want that highlight there. And then add another one. They say good things come in threes, so I got three gills there just to show that they're there, right? So that, and if I rotate it, you'll see it a little bit more. Go right down to the bottom of the chin. And then around the base of the gills there, I'm going to put this line in because it's a little bit separate. So I just push that in and blend the rest over. So who has used all three of their tools? Everybody, that's great. All right, so now I'm sort of where I want it. I'm just going to use this tool to give it some scales. So I'm just going to press the looped end in there all over the body. And that gives me a nice appearance of scales. So this is another way to use your tool. You can use it as a texturing tool. It doesn't matter too much how you lay down the scales if you were doing a fish, but I'm just doing them on a diagonal. It's a little bit more interesting than just a straight line. I'm going to go all the way until close to the head, and then I'm going to stop. And so that's pretty much how I want it. Looks like a fish. I can take my little sharpened stick. I can trim the edges a little. Does anyone have any questions? Maybe about anything.